This is the Brandy Rhodes thrilling, giant killing, mustaching, formerly dashing prince of pro wrestling, Cody, depending on where you are, and if it's on television, Cody Rhodes. And you are watching Wrestling with Regret.
You know, folks, over the years, I've covered a lot of bad wrestling shows on this channel, but for the most part, those bad shows were very short-term things, one-and-dones, small blips on the radar whose legends have outgrown the scope of what actually happened at that time. But in all my life, I have never seen professional wrestling at such a consistently bad level for so long until I saw the Universal Wrestling Federation. Now, I'm not talking about the company formerly known as Mid-South Wrestling, which Bill Watts renamed in 1986 to try and take things national. That was good wrestling, but in the early 1990s, a visionary promoter by the name of Herb Abrams created a company of his own of the same name because it turns out that Watts never trademarked it. So until the end of time, Bill Watts, a legendary promoter and booker in his own right, will forever have to share his UWF legacy with Herb Abrams. When fans want to bring up the topic of Universal Wrestling Federation, they'll leave the suffix Bill Watts or Herb Abrams before continuing the discussion. And this week, you'll learn why one was revered and the other was reviled. But before we continue on, I must take on the look of the times to really get myself into the mood for what we're talking about here. And here we go. The year was 1990. Herb Abrams started up his version of the UWF with the goal of bringing wrestling back to its roots, though what he meant by that was never elaborated on. The Fed was based in Southern California, and although it's not my first choice of historic territories to try and build your brand around, the LA area did have a fair amount of wrestling credibility, so they were off to a good enough start. Abrams was ambitious, securing a TV deal with the now defunct Sports Channel and signing a bevy of free agents like Bob Orton, Steve Williams, Paul Orndorff, Bam Bam Bigelow, Billy Jack Haynes, Ken Patera, and Colonel DeBeers. Some of the younger talent with more upside included Cactus Jack, David Sammartino, and Steve Ray, not to be confused with Stevie Ray. And man, did Abrams have big plans for the UWF. He fully expected this federation to immediately compete with the WWF and WCW and eventually surpass them. During the press conference announcing the UWF, he was asked how he could expect to succeed in wrestling when he had no experience in it. According to McFoley in his first book, Abrams said, quote, "What they're looking for, I have, and that's the Hollywood glitz," end quote. Said the guy who wanted to bring wrestling back to the way it used to be. Those two concepts are kind of polar opposites. The first episode of Fury Hour aired on October 1st, 1990, emanating from Reseda, California. Abrams and Bruno Sammartino provided the commentary, which explains how David got the gig. The 450 fans in attendance bore witness to, quite simply, some below-average wrestling. Half of the matches ended in squashes with jobbers, with names like Spitball Patterson and Davey Meltzer?
Look at this, right off the bat, that's typical of Dr. Death. Did you see that attack on Davey Meltzer?
That is some thinly veiled shade. The other half of the matches, aka anything that didn't involve chubby molded jobbers, ended in some kind of bullshit finish. Whether it was a disqualification, a countout, or a double countout, UWF viewers rarely if ever saw clean finishes to matches with any kind of meaning. This was quite possibly the hallmark of the Herb Abrams era. The lack of a strong booker led Abrams to slap matches together, often with no storyline reasoning, and leading many of the wrestlers' egos to get in the way of business. This is the problem you'll see often in the UWF. Here are the first few TV main events. Dan Spivey and B. Brian Blair ends in a double countout. Colonel DeBeers and Billy Jack Haynes ends in a double countout. Dr. Death and Paul Orndorff in, you guessed it, a double countout. And in a surprising twist, Bob Orton and Orndorff ends when only Orton gets counted out. It would take 5 episodes for a match to end on a conclusive finish. And after that, episodes 6 and 7 end in some kind of DQ finish. But the end of episode 8 was a real treat, folks, with an ending I have literally never seen before.
Bruno, because our hour is almost up, we'll be leaving this match. But we'll see the conclusion of this Patera Koloff battle next week. We'll be right back.
That's right, you had to wait until the following week to catch the thrilling conclusion to Ken Patera versus Nikita Koloff. This was a taped show. They couldn't make this shit fit under an hour? Oh, but it gets better, folks, because guess how the match actually ended?
Big boot right to Patera's chest and a drop clock. Look at that, backdrop right over the top rope.
Great move by Patera. Well, what is this?
What happened here?
He was DQ'd for throwing a guy over the top rope? I thought Herb Abrams was booking this, not Bill Watts. Let's move on to the commentary. At the end of 1990, Dave Meltzer, the writer, not the jobber, called Abrams the worst TV announcer of the year, and it's not hard to see why. Abrams could barely form complete sentences, much less call moves.
Look at the fire in Dr. Death's eyes, Bruno. It's intense. It's very intense.
Billy should not let up on him right now. Push him away, Billy. Push him away. Yeah, kick him to the groin. There, he's starting up. He's starting it up.
Well, he's got his opponent in trouble. He can do his dance.
Come on, GB.
Because of this, most of the commentary duties fell on Sammartino. Yeah, let the guy with a thick accent do 90% of the talking, but at least he was having fun.
David ducked and he threw right between those ropes against that steel post. And look at the guy. He's back in there in action. Unbelievable.
A recurring part of Fury Hour was Captain Lou's Corner, a pre-taped segment where Lou Albano would interview wrestlers or other managers that would often disintegrate into full-on screaming matches.
But your brain is the brain of a dehydrated baby. If they put your brain in a pigeon or a parakeet, zing it by backwards. That's all right.
One of Lou's most memorable moments was when he interviewed Andre the Giant during episodes 6 and 8. Though Andre never wrestled there, he made a couple of appearances on TV as a way to help bolster the UWF's credibility, which all went to shit when Andre returned to the WWF before these segments finally aired. Look at this production value, it's abysmal. The background here is tacky by 1990s standards, and are parts of Lou's shirt keying out? Did nobody catch this beforehand?
Hey, do you have any idea how hard it is to find a Hawaiian shirt without any blue or green on it? No, you don't. You wouldn't know, because you got the brain of a dehydrated baby. I feel so good, I feel so fine, Billy, Billy, Billy.
And let's talk about the aesthetic for a minute, specifically the fact they never had one. Every location for a TV taping was different, so there was never any uniform lighting or backdrops. These guys never even had a proper entranceway. The graphics were wildly inconsistent and didn't always change for the better. Compared to what WCW and the WWF were doing at the same time, this was Bush League, amateur hour, cable access stuff. I've seen high schoolers with better production than this. Aside from the talent, where'd all the money for this fed go anyway? Oh yes, I forgot to mention, Herb Abrams had a tremendous cocaine habit. Turns out Hollywood glitz was just code. By all accounts, this drug addiction made old Herbie a very paranoid man. One of the biggest stories to ever come out of the UWF has to be the time he had Dr. Death intentionally break the nose of young up-and-comer Steve Ray during a match. Apparently, Herb believed that Ray was sleeping with his wife, so he gave Williams a whopping $100 extra to stiff Ray. Which would be a fascinating story if it were true.
That match, what makes it so spectacular is that it was a total work.
Don't get me wrong, Herb still did cocaine, but that wasn't what fueled this incident. According to Steve Ray himself, it was Herb's wife who came on to him, not the other way around. Steve told Herb what had happened, and along with Dr. Death, the three men came up with a match that was stiffer than what was the norm at the time in an effort to draw more intrigue to this face versus face match. There was no broken nose, though Ray did suffer a cut. And this scene where Herb approached Ray after the match, apparently that was Herb telling Ray to swing at him to add to the illusion.
Herb did this ad-lib thing. He just jumped in the ring. That was totally unexpected. And he whispered in my ear, he said, take a swing at me. And I did. And then, that's when I found out Herb told everyone that he paid Dr. Death $100 to break my nose.
It's one of those seedy sounding stories in wrestling history that managed to work everybody, including the boys. It did help build interest in Steve Ray and give him more of an edgy vibe, but wow, what a hell of a way to go about doing that. One thing that Abrams definitely had down to a pat was marketing and merchandising. And boy, do these guys have some of the ugliest, tackiest merchandise you've ever seen. What wrestling fan wouldn't want a terrible drawing of Paul Orndorff or B. Brian Blair or Denny Spivey emblazoned upon their torso? And check out those color schemes. I know neon was a big thing in the early 90s, so it was actually smart to market that way, but did they never think to make something a little more modern as time went on? But giving credit where it's due, the UWF went places other promotions wouldn't dare going. Sure, the WWF had their ice cream bars and their cereal, while the UWF entered the brave new world of oatmeal cookies.
We've got the Steve Ray Wild Thing cookie, the Bruno Sammartino, the Lou Albano, and the Herbie cookie.
Yes, Herbie cookies, because who doesn't want to think of jolly little coked up Herb Abrams when choking down these bad boys? I'd be remiss if I ignored the contributions of my old trainer, Colonel De Beers. The South African militant gimmick had been going on for a while in the AWA, so everyone knew some racist shit was going to go down. But it was taken to a whole new level in episode 2 of Fury Hour, as De Beers achieved his biggest career highlight since losing a turkey on a pole match to Jake Milliman.
With the referee.
He's a black man!
What?
Easy Ed demanded that the black referee vacate the premises simply due to the color of his skin, yet he seemingly had no problem when an Hispanic referee came to replace him. Wait, Jesse Hernandez? Get out of my life! The best part of this segment comes when De Beers' opponent, Billy Jack Haynes, comes out and demands the black referee come back to work the match. He never did. Lol. Things got even more controversial for De Beers, as he would later go on to beat the shit out of that black ref and even whip a black wrestler with a leather belt. Now, that level of violence is not befitting of someone like the Mega Maharishi. And on it went for weeks and weeks. Yet in spite of all this madness, the crowd size never diminished, because it never got that big to begin with. TV tapings were held in places like Southern California, Florida, and New York, but they rarely drew more than 500 people and never got above 900. All this momentum naturally led to Beach Brawl, the UWF's first and only pay-per-view event. Held just outside of Tampa, Florida on June 9, 1991, a whopping 550 people paid to see some action. Some of the highlights include Luna assaulting the former Battle Cat, and a street fight between Johnny Ace and Terry Gordy that officially ended in a double countout in 6 minutes, in what I can only assume was a fuck up on the ref's part. But then they brawled for another 5 or so to make up for it, showing off all those empty seats. We then had a match to determine the new women's champion, as Candy Divine took on Rockin' Robin.
We know that's going to be a great bout. Looking forward to seeing that. And there is the Boston Crab. Let me see.
Sorry, that Boston Crab's not sexy enough. Where's the extreme close-up of her crotch? Our next bout was a strap match between Colonel De Beers against Paul Orndorff. In the opening package, De Beers was apparently going to be managed by someone named Mr. Black, which, but that guy was nowhere to be seen come bell time. We then got a special live edition of Captain Lou's Corner, where he called out Luna and the Blackhearts, talked shit about them to their faces for about a minute, then walked away.
All right, everyone. My next guest at this time is the host of Wrestling with Regret. Please welcome Brian Zay. Come on here, Brian.
Oh wow. I didn't even know I was booked. Be right there, Captain Lou. Hey, Captain Lou, what's going on?
You listen to me, you no-good, lousy scoundrel. I've had it up to here with your rotten opinions and your ugly suits and your stupid hair. You got the brain of a dehydrated baby, and you're ugly, and nobody likes you. You don't get the nerve to stand up to Captain Lou. I don't have to take your stuff.
What happened to your shirt?
I don't like your face. I'm out of here.
Well, that was a waste of time. After a Legends match featuring Ivan Koloff and Bob Backlund that went no longer than 3 minutes, and a match where Steve Ray teamed with the unfortunately named Sonny Beach to defeat Cactus Jack and Bob Orton, our main event featured Steve Williams and Bam Bam Bigelow fighting for the new television title. And let's just see what Bigelow has to say about his big match.
Well, everybody knows that the Bam Bam Bigelow, myself, I have a lot of surprises. I have a lot of mobility, jobility, and hobility.
That's why he lost his match with Lawrence Taylor. He didn't work enough on his hobility. The two men started bleeding within a minute of the match, with Williams ultimately going over in the end with a clean finish, a happy crowd, and the lowest buy rate in wrestling history. To give you some perspective, WWE's worst buy rate was December to December in 2006 with 90,000 buys. In comparison, Heroes of Wrestling drew 26,000 buys. You know your show is bad when this is a bigger draw. Undeterred, Abrams soldiered on with the Universal Wrestling Federation and the Fury Hour. As wrestlers came and went, the garbage finishes remained, and the live attendance remained the lowest of the low. No fewer than 12 championships would be introduced over the years, with all but 3 of them only having a single champion before they were retired. Lou Albano and Herb began to host interview segments on the set of Between Two Ferns, including one with Bruno Sammartino that featured a surprisingly frank discussion about steroid use in wrestling.
Even if you can achieve by taking steroids, you can become Mr. America, you can become a world champion wrestler. What good is it if 10, 15 years down the road they can either kill you or you can become an invalid as a result of it?
Don't look for the quick solution. That's
absolutely.
Over time, old Herbie would have an even larger presence on the show, dubbing himself Mr. Electricity. When Mick Foley asked Herb's girlfriend why he had that nickname, she said, quote, "Because when he plugs it in, he really turns me on," end quote. Why that wasn't his catchphrase on air, I have no idea. He fought with a manager by the name of Mr. Red that ended up with him getting bloodied and bruised at the hands of Red's wrestlers. And that gave us this little gem.
Colonel Red, no one has ever done something like this to me! I am going to get you once and for all!
By doing this, Abrams appears to have become the first real-life authority figure of a major promotion to heavily push himself as part of the show, beating guys like Eric Bischoff and Vincent McMahon by at least 5 years. How does that little factoid never make it onto the network docs? The next big UWF show took place on September 23rd, 1994, the Blackjack Brawl at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Some 500 people packed this 4,000-seat arena for the Federation's one and only live televised event. There were lots of impressive names on display here, but the biggest star in my opinion was ring announcer Steve Rossi, who displayed the attributes of every terrible indie ring announcer all rolled into one.
How about a big round of applause for Dangerous Dan Spivey? Here he comes.
This is it.
Wait till you see this guy. Thor! Thor! Everybody shout that. Thor!
Nearly every match on this show was for a championship. Danny Spivey beat Johnny Ace to become the America's champion after a Missy Hyatt double cross. Jack Armstrong beat Mondo Guerrero, or Guerrero, for the junior heavyweight title in a match that featured Mondo coming out to this song.
Yo quiero chimichangas y chili carrero.
Mikado.
I swear to God that better have been a rib. Sonny Beach defeated Dr. Feelgood to become the new TV champion, then was immediately KO'd with chloroform. Little Tokyo defeated the Karate Kid to become the first ever midget champion, but Abrams couldn't make it past this point without making an ass of himself.
You say kampai?
Kampai, yes.
I say...
How you know kampai?
How do I know kampai? Yeah. I used to be married to a Japanese girl.
Oh, yeah?
Now, for years, Abrams has been falsely accused of saying he was married to a Jap in this segment, but as you can clearly tell in that video, he didn't say that at all. No. Somebody else made that comment.
That did not please Little Tokyo.
Great. You hear what karate call him a goofy Jap. Can you imagine that?
Candy Devine, or Divian as Steve Rossi announced her, defeated the future Ivory, Tina Moretti, for the women's title. In the semi-main event, Cactus Jack took on Jimmy Snuka in one of the worst lumberjack matches I've ever seen. The two just worked headlocks for the most part, and the lumberjacks are more content to just lean on the wrestlers than do anything else with them. Snuka takes his own bump to the outside for some reason, and by the end, everyone's brawling as the match ends in a double countout. The very thing lumberjacks are supposed to prevent.
They didn't even pay for those seats!
That's okay, nobody else did either. In our main event, Dr. Death Steve Williams and Sid Vicious went one-on-one to determine the new UWF World Champion. As the match goes on, a couple of the boards under the canvas begin to symbolically pop out of place. Williams hits a gut-wrench powerbomb on Sid to seal the deal, but the Skyscrapers would reunite as Danny Spivey interfered. A DQ finish, an appropriate end for what would be the final UWF event. Fast forward to 1996, when Herb Abrams passed away, suffering a massive cocaine-induced heart attack while in police custody after being found naked and covered in baby oil in a high-rise office building, chasing a prostitute with a baseball bat. Just like how Grandpa went out. Even though they hadn't run a single show after Blackjack Brawl, it was Abrams' death that caused the Universal Wrestling Federation to officially close its doors. There have been a lot of failed attempts over the decades at trying to capture the spirit of old school wrestling. Maccabia Mania and Heroes of Wrestling immediately come to mind, but those shows can't hold a candle to the lengthy, sustained, unbridled chaos that was the UWF. If you think about it, this company had a lot of tools to succeed, or at least have a profitable run. They had a stacked roster featuring plenty of legends who might have been working beyond their best drawing years, but who were by no means run down. They had guys like Bruno Sammartino and Lou Albano as on their talent, which gave them credibility, and they had that mythical TV deal that is so essential to the success of any upstart federation. But ultimately, it was the company's mission statement that played a role in their undoing. The UWF was so focused on these nostalgia acts on their own, they didn't seem to have time to focus on anything else, like building toward the future or having some competent booking. A ship is only as good as its captain, and by many accounts, Herb Abrams was like Captain Kirk if he had no eyes, a missing arm, and a case of vertigo. After working on this episode, the best way I can describe Mr. Electricity was that he was misunderstood. Those who worked with him have talked about how nice and well-liked he was, and no one can say that he wasn't ambitious and driven.
He employed a lot of workers who, needed a job. The talent that he had, the balls that he had, there was definitely a good side to him.
Herbie was a legendary hustler, but whether it was the drugs, his failed business deals catching up to him, or some combination of all that, the whole endeavor suffered as a result. Besides the name, the one thing that the Herb Abrams version of the UWF had in common with the Bill Watts version was that nobody was buying what they were selling. The Abrams version was a road paved with good intentions, but ultimately washed out like so many other wrestling leagues before and after it. It may not have been pretty, or coherent, or even good, but man, how about those sweet jobber mullets? Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, comment below, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.